Inner Quest explores various pathways through which you can connect with the infinite wisdom of the universe and apply it to personal, professional, and spiritual growth. This program, featuring accomplished practitioners, educators, and authors, is provided by Infinity Foundation, an innovative center for holistic studies and research. We invite you to share this journey with us.
Hello, welcome to Inner Quest. My name is Jay Stone, your host for today, and our guest is Eva Heyek. Welcome, Eva.
Thank you.
Well, Eva is a grief recovery specialist certified by the Grief Recovery Institute in Sherman Oaks, California. Eva holds a master's in spiritual psychology and has a deep passion for assisting others in their healing from significant loss in their lives. Eva uses the profound process outlined in the grief recovery method. Eva, can you tell our audience a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. I was born in Canada, in Montreal, and then my parents moved to Chicago, so this is really my hometown. And in 1995, I moved out to California and became a flight attendant for United Airlines. And that was also the time I went back to school and I received my undergraduate degree and my master's degree and became certified as a grief recovery specialist.
Now, psychology is a broad field. Why did you choose grief recovery instead of some other aspect of psychology?
Well, when you look at grief, grief really is centered around loss, any kind of loss. And I felt drawn to that because I feel that when somebody's grieving, that's really what's going on. They've lost something.
Okay. And is it just the grief around losing a person, or can it be, an item like a favorite watch, like something that's been stolen in a burglary, even a loss of one's abilities, as we age?
Well, when I went into the grief recovery program, that's really the first thing that the instructor had said. He said that grief is actually the normal and natural reaction to significant emotional loss, and then he added on to that of any kind. Mm-hmm. And I walked into this with a perception for many years that loss was very limited to perhaps death of a parent. And that's what I thought. I was thinking, okay, when I have, or if somebody's grieving, it's because they've lost someone. However, when he said of any kind, there are 42 potential losses somebody can experience in their lifetime, just like you said. It could be loss of a family member, it could be death, it could be divorce, it could be health.
It could be a job.
It could be a job.
Money.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And I think you said the definition of grief in there, but
yes,
for our audience, so they know how you define grief. So go ahead, define it for us.
It is the normal and natural reaction to significant emotional loss of any kind.
Okay. Now, is it possible to prepare for grief? Let's say, the loss. Can we prepare for a loss before it actually happens?
I believe that you can if you have the tools to apply now. So for future losses that you might have. But most of us in our society have not been given the tools on managing loss.
And so what are some of the tools?
Well, those are the pearls of wisdom in the grief recovery method. Mm-hmm. Some of the tools, actually this is an entire process that one goes through. And it's about actually going back to the first moment that you can remember whatever loss comes to your mind. Mm-hmm. And what you do is you process this. You go not only to that first memory, but from that memory to present day. Mm-hmm. And you graph it out. All the things that you can remember.
You actually put it out on paper?
You do. You make a graph on the paper and you put down the first date of your first conscious memory that you've had and all the losses that have come up to today's date. Mm-hmm. That then gives you the insight of all the things that you've lost that you have probably forgotten about.
Yeah. Well, do you find that people grieve differently at different ages. Like I experienced loss even inside the womb that I was able to recall, and then loss at age 3 when my sister died, and then, different losses along my life. And now I feel like I'm more mature. I can handle loss differently, more maturely. But you're the expert. You tell me. I mean, sure, losing a spouse after 40 or 50 years is going to be devastating, but I would think it would be easier in some respects because of the maturity that one has.
So what I have found is that to answer that question, actually the definition of recovery comes forward. So if I can define that,
Please.
other than just saying that recovery is feeling better, but recovery is really about discovering and completing all of the unfinished communications that have accrued in your relationships. How do you do that? You don't have all of the facets at 3 years of age or 5 years of age or 8 years of age to actually process what you can process at 20 or 30 or 40. But the key is really having the tools to apply in your life in order to move through the experience of loss.
So, let's say at age 30, I developed the tools to finally get over the loss that occurred to me at age 3.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because at 30, you have much more insight, and you do have more tools available to you that you can use to heal from that experience as a younger child.
Now, are you trained to work with children as well?
No, because the children actually, it's really about the adult, because the child will learn from the adult, meaning the parent, and how to work through a grieving process.
But the parent is grieving too.
Yes, but if the parent has the tools, then the parent can work with the child in helping them.
Okay. So you're going to explain the pearls of wisdom of the grief recovery method. So what's the first step?
Well, the first step is really acknowledging that there is a grief, a situation, a loss that you would like to work on. It could be a divorce, it could be death. And it's coming into the program with the openness and the willingness to see why it hasn't resolved itself yet.
Okay.
Why you haven't been able to. And it's not so much get over it, but it's about completing, like I said, unfinished communications that were in that relationship.
Well, if somebody is deceased, how do you complete the communications?
You still do it because it's not really about that individual. It's really about your unfinished business, what you haven't said.
So are we talking about interpersonal communication or intrapersonal communication?
Well, I would say interpersonal communication.
Okay, so you communicating with the other person instead of what's the communication that's going on within oneself?
Well, you can do, I think both of those are pretty closely related.
Yeah.
So even if that person isn't here, you still can communicate with them through writing a letter, through writing down the things that you wish could have been.
How about having a conversation with that?
And you can have a conversation with them as well. I know that seems, for some people, that seems very strange. When I started going into this work, it was about actually putting them in a chair in front of me, even though they weren't there, and having that conversation, saying those things that I could never have said when they were around. Or even if they were around, things that, when I say recovery is discovering and completing, we discover things that we have forgotten that we wish we could have said.
But aren't we all in recovery?
All the time.
Because we're all discovering and completing.
Yes, we are, all the time.
Where does the role of cycles play into this? It seems pretty cyclical, like you discover, you complete, and then you kind of hit a plateau, and then it's time to discover and complete some more.
Well, the wonderful thing is when you receive the tools, when you go through this and you actually work the process, what happens is you choose a loss, whatever that loss might be. It could have been, let's just say it is a divorce. You do this entire process and work through it, and things are in layers. I'm sure you know that. So when that's completed, and you feel complete with that in the moment, you can put that aside.
Okay.
And then something else might come forward, a different loss. that you can once again apply all the tools and work through that, because there's so many losses that we've experienced.
All right. So the first step is to acknowledge one has a loss.
Yes.
What's the next step?
Well, I feel a wonderful validation is really realizing that our society has not given us the tools necessary to grieve.
Why is that?
That's a really good question.
Okay.
All I know is that we've been given tools such as be strong if somebody loses somebody. How many times have we heard that? How many times have we heard it just takes time
Keep the faith.
to heal? Keep the faith.
Yeah.
How about...
It's true. It does take time.
But there is truth to that, yes, but it doesn't take time without having tools. Time in and of itself will do nothing for you.
Well, I think there's a natural process. If I cut myself, my body will automatically start to heal. It sends white blood cells to kill the pathogens. If it was very severe, maybe I'd have to put a Band-Aid on or get stitches, but there's a natural healing process. Wouldn't you say that goes on with our emotions?
Well, this is what I would say to that. You just said if you cut yourself, you have an immune system that goes to work right away.
Yeah.
And white blood cells will come, and then maybe a Band-Aid on it, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But on the emotional level, what is your Band-Aid? What are the white blood cells? They're the tools.
Yeah.
To be able
Well,
to...
I would say instincts, intuition, imagination, faith, humor, maybe meditation, connecting transpersonal, like connecting to God or to the source, etc. So.
Well, you have a lot of tools that you would apply
Yeah.
to those experiences.
Yeah.
I find that most people don't even have that.
Yeah.
What they tend to do is if something hurts, what do we tend to do? We tend to freeze up.
Yeah, your body language is saying it right
and
now.
that's so true. Something
Yeah.
happens. How
It's
do I
like
deal with
you're
this?
pulling in
And look at
making it worse.
Look what society gives us. If somebody passes on, you have the 3 days to make all the funeral arrangements and take care of the funeral, and then you have to be right back to work.
Yeah, I can. What I'm thinking, you're saying it reminded me. Was with my grandmother when she passed away, and like within 15 minutes they wanted me to make decisions, about her body, and I said, "Can you give me a little time?"
Exactly.
It was 3 a.m. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Everything is so quick nowadays. Okay, now
Yeah.
you have to call the coroner. They have to zipper up the bag, take them out of the funeral home, and that's it. And you're just like, what just happened? So there's all that shock, that disbelief, and even if somebody's been sick for a long period of time, they are now gone.
Yeah.
And it's that whole process of, now what?
Well, and then it's all out in public, which can be very difficult. Funerals, wakes, that brings up some
Absolutely.
strange stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah. May bring out the best in some people, may bring out the worst.
Absolutely.
All right, so the next step in the process, the tools you're talking about, making the timeline or the graph, and then is a person supposed to have insight while they're doing that?
Well, what happens is the first thing they do is a history graph, which goes again from the date of your first conscious memory. For me, I have a memory when I was 3 years old. And from that point, I go all the way up to today's date, and I write down all of my experiences that I've had around loss. Mm-hmm. I lost some animals, I lost a friend who passed on, I had a divorce, and all those dates I write down, and those experiences. And out of that graph, I pick one that I feel is going to be the greatest loss I'm experiencing now, and I want to resolve all of my feelings that are attached to that loss.
Yeah. Now, does the grief recovery method actually give you like some paper to do that, or guidelines?
Yes.
What it looks like? Oh, I wish
Yes.
I would have asked you to bring that in. It would have been great.
Yes.
So what's on this timeline? I know the individual dates, but
Yes.
are there different sections to it?
Well, again, the first one is all about loss. That's your history graph. You choose one loss that you want to work on, and then you do a loss history graph on that experience. So if I can give a little bit more insight, I'll just choose the first person I did was my mother. And on the line, you make a line from your first memory to today's date. On the very bottom of the graph, you're going to list all the negatives, all the things that were losses. And on the top of the graph, you're going to list everything that was good. Mm-hmm. Because every relationship has both. Mm-hmm. You know, we need to understand that there's both the feel-good part of the relationship and the not so feel-good part of the relationship.
Yeah.
So that's the next step, is listing all the things that were uncomfortable and the things that you did have with that individual that you felt comfortable with.
Okay. And then where does the transformation occur?
Well, the transformation occurs then with your writing, because what you're actually going to do is choose to do 3 different areas. One is the things that you are thankful for that person, the things that you're sorry for, that you would like to apologize for, and the significant emotional statements that you were never able to make, which could be both positive and negative.
All right, so somebody comes to you. Are they writing this out in their office, or you just send them home and says, you got some homework?
Okay, so this is homework.
Okay.
This is if I do a workshop with a lot of people, it's 12 weeks. If I work individually with someone, it could be as short as 7. And every week there's an assignment. And yes, that is one of the assignments. And that's closer to the end, actually, because you have already chosen the person. You've already made the graph, which takes a week. You want to take and give yourself time to figure out what actually are the positives and negatives that you had in that relationship. And then the next week is writing your apologies, your forgivenesses, and your significant emotional statements, which actually are really never for the other person. They're really for you in resolving what's unresolved in that relationship.
Now, is there a way to validate by, do your clients or the people go through this process validate it?
Yes.
Okay, how would they go about validating it?
Well, they validate it by having another person that they can read it to.
Okay.
Not being the person that they wrote it about.
Okay. All right.
Just like like if you were in a therapist's office, you would be speaking to the therapist would validate you and validate the process.
But I would think one could validate it for him or herself by feeling a shift. You know, let's say, I feel the grief and the sadness in my heart or my chest, and they use their mind's eye look inside, and it's not there anymore. You know, the tension, the tightness, the constriction, it's gone.
And yes, that does happen. And it's allowing themselves to do that. When I say discovering and completing, they'll do it once, and then they might do it another 100 times, because things will always keep showing up.
Now, have you ever worked with veterans? I feel this would be an excellent method for veterans.
I have not, but it has been something I would love to do. I would love to work with them, yes.
Yeah, because I know there's a therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder, and they find that by reviewing it again and again and again, that it just, each review, it just takes a little bit more of the negative emotions out of the person.
It's interesting you say that, because I did read an article about that, and it was about a family that lost their son, who actually, and he was young, he committed suicide. And for 3 years, they still could not change the room. They could do nothing. So there's so much unfinished there, because he was just taken away so abruptly. There wasn't a chance to even communicate anything. Yeah. And that's where this would just be such a healing process. Not that they ever have to change the room, but like you said, every time you do it, there's more healing that happens, because there's more release of the pain.
Okay. And so what are some of the other tools or steps to this process?
Well, this is really, it's about understanding how our society has put a cap on it, and we've learned things that I should be strong, or it just takes time, or John James, who's actually the founder of the Grief Recovery Handbook, and Russell Friedman, but if I talk about John, he lost a son in infancy, and that's what catapulted him into this work. And a well-meaning doctor came up to him, and he put his arm around him, and he said, you know what, John, don't feel bad. You and your wife are young enough, and you can have another child. But that completely negated his experience.
Yeah.
Again, a well-meaning doctor saying, you can have another child, it just takes time, and all of these things that were taught. So when I say there's tools, there's a huge amount of validation that says, look what you've had to hear and try to live with an experience of loss, but you've just been told that you should be strong, it just takes time, you can replace your loss.
Well, what would you say to a person like that in that situation?
I would let them grieve. I would just say this is the normal and natural process, and I am here for you, and just to let yourself, give yourself permission to simply feel what you're going to feel. Mm-hmm. So many times we're just torn out of that, and we feel we should be over it. How can you possibly be over a loss if you haven't given yourself the time to process and be in that pain?
Okay, so somebody passes away close to us. When should they start the grief recovery process or method? One sense would be right away, but when do you make that timeline and really dig in? Is it 6 months afterwards? Is it a year? Is it 3 months? I assume it's going to be different for different people, but what's your take? You're the expert.
My take is that it would be immediate. And when I say that, what I mean is there's other tools that, when they talk about writing, I think writing is probably one of the most healing things that you can do for yourself. If you've had a shock, the writing would be, I'm shocked, I'm shocked, I'm shocked. And you write it 1,000 times because it's getting that energy and that disbelief and whatever's happened to you out on that piece of paper. And as you keep writing, more will come forward. I can't believe this happened. I can't believe it's this constant renewing of the mind, so to speak, would be a good description. Mm-hmm. Because you're in such, it's just such a painful experience to have loss. Mm-hmm. And like I said, we're just thrown right into, okay, now you need to fix it and go on, and that just doesn't work because that's what we do. And then we end up having chronic illnesses and we don't feel well because we're carrying all of this emotional heavy burden that we want to not be carrying.
Have you ever heard of the social readjustment scale?
I have not heard of that.
Well, it's a scale created by medical doctors such as psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, and it has to do with the most difficult times in our life is when we have to adapt or change, a major change. And the studies show that after a major change, such as number one on the list is death of a spouse, that a person's like a couple hundred times more likely to have cancer a year and a half to 2 years out. It was actually started by an oncologist who discovered that a year or two before the cancer, there was been a significant loss in his patient's life. And so, just to be aware, the potential to become physically ill after a loss is important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you're saying, to start immediately. So if a dear friend, suffers a loss, whether it be death of a spouse or death of a parent, a divorce, we should do more listening than preaching.
Absolutely, because if we listen, that's really what the other person needs. They will find their own way. They will find a way through their grief. And if you can just be present to be there with them.
See, that's what I mean about we naturally heal.
We do naturally heal.
Yeah.
If we could be present for somebody. And what happens is that most of us are uncomfortable with that. Mm-hmm. We want to fix it. We want to change it.
Okay.
And that's not for us to do for them.
Okay. So who are the people who created grief recovery? You mentioned a couple of the authors. Is anything else we should know about those guys?
Well, it was John James and Russell Friedman. I'd like to say something about John James, and it's when he lost his child in infancy, he went and read every single grief book he could find. Mm-hmm. And what he found was books that would tell him how he felt. Mm-hmm. But he already knew that. What he wanted was a book that would help him move through the pain.
Mm-hmm.
And that birthed the grief recovery process, the grief recovery method.
Okay, and has it been revised over the years?
I don't believe it has been revised at all.
Okay, and how long has the grief recovery method exist?
Over 30 years.
Okay.
And it's being done all over the world.
Did he ever have another child?
He did.
Okay.
He did.
Yeah.
Who works actually with him,
Okay.
which is great.
What is the single most off-limit topic for discussion in the United States?
Grief. Or
Yeah.
people's reaction to loss.
Okay.
Most people, it's kind of like a hands-off because they don't know what to do.
I agree. And have you studied this cross-culturally, like, how it's different in India and China and Japan and Eastern Europe?
I feel that it's culturally there's different ways that they're, again, programmed on how they're supposed to deal with loss, just like we have it here in the United States.
Well, like in Mexico, they have like the Day of the Dead.
Mm-hmm.
In Japan, they have ancestor worships where they set up altars for their loved ones.
And I believe all of that is wonderful. I just feel on an emotional level, there's things that are unfinished,
Mm-hmm.
and those I feel need to be addressed.
Okay. And what initially drew you to this line of work?
Both my parents were aging, and I thought, well, I wanted something that would help support me through the process when they make their transition.
And are your parents alive?
My father passed last August, and my mom is still living.
And so did you find this process, this method helpful?
Absolutely.
In what ways?
I had probably the most wonderful experience when my father passed, and I didn't anticipate that. It was just a beautiful experience. I had done this well before my father passed away. I did this about 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had already completed all of the things that I wanted to say to him. Without him, I did it within myself.
Okay.
And so when he did pass, it was just really wonderful.
And do you find it's different when an elderly person passes versus a young child or an infant for people?
I feel it is different in the sense that I know somebody now who has just lost their child, and it wasn't anticipated or expected.
Okay.
And I think if it's expected, at least you have some awareness that it's going to happen.
Yeah.
But when it's sudden, like a suicide or like you were just saying, an accident, there's a lot of shock involved in that. And that needs to really be honored for the individual.
I've got to cut you off because we've got to wrap up.
Oh, my goodness.
For more information about Eva Infinity Foundation and her Quest talk show, check us out on the internet. Until next time, we wish you good health, good fortune, and good spirits. Eva, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
For more information about this show, our guest, Infinity Foundation, or any of our other programs, please visit our website, infinityfoundation.org, or call us at 847-831-8828.